Hi, today I want to talk about Algernon Blackwood's The Willows. This just, I don't know, it's like I'm totally out of like the zone I'm supposed to be in, right, when I record. But anyways, I still want to talk about this story and I don't want to wait any longer. So we're going to do it right now. Algernon Blackwood is an English writer. He wrote The Willows. It says it was first published as part of a short story collection, The Listener and Other Stories, I think, in 1907. It probably has a lot of notoriety or is remembered because H.P. Lovecraft cited it as one of the best examples of weird fiction, like period. Like maybe his favorite story or something like that. Okay, let's get the quote because otherwise I'm just like maybe he said I wish I was a willow. I don't know what. No, that's not what he said. Lovecraft said that he thought it considered among the finest or the finest weird fiction supernatural story. Lovecraft said it was the finest supernatural story in the English language. So that's pretty, I mean, we know who Lovecraft is, so maybe we should know who Blackwood is. In fact, this story has been reprinted a lot. A lot. I have two Blackwood collections. Both of them have The Willows. And The Willows is more of a novella than a short story. So I don't know which one I said it was. But anyways, I've got, I've got it in here in the best ghost stories of Algernon Blackwood, which is very good. And also in his ancient sorceries, which still has the ancient sticker from the now bygone Borders. The halcyon days of bookstores. It's a really great story that deals with these two men canoeing, kind of like on a. It seems like I should have said something else first. Well, wait, before we summarize the story, maybe we did say something. So Blackwood, let's talk about Blackwood for maybe a second, I guess. Wrote a lot of supernatural stories and ghost stories. His stuff is not specifically trying to be horror stories. He's not trying to frighten you exactly, but it ends up, many of his things can end up being pretty creepy. The Willows is not maybe the most terrifying story, but there's a lot of suggestion, right? It's one of those stories where you can kind of like let it can kind of get away from you. And I think that's maybe a really good way of describing Blackwood's fiction is it can kind of get away from you. You kind of like, this is just a story about this. Why is this? Man, I just keep like thinking about the same image over and over, this thing in my head that I read it. And that's kind of how, at least for me, my experience with Blackwood always has been. It's this very relaxed pace. He's not in a big hurry to get to the ghost, get to the supernatural element. So I'm going to talk a bit about the story, which is some medium to mild spoiling stuff, right? And then I probably will talk about the end, and then of course I'll try to say when I'm going to do that and let you know. The story follows two men who are on a sort of long holiday. They're going on a canoeing trip down the Danube, sort of like canoe during the day and then camp at night, type sort of thing, and going down the Danube. And at first, it's very playful. The river is described as being young and silly and kind of fun, and it kind of takes on a life of its own for these two men, right? The narrator, who's a sort of maybe a slightly more imaginative type, and then his friend, the Swede, who is very pragmatic. Right, he doesn't have much. He doesn't seem to have very much imagination, but who is sort of like for this more imaginative narrator, I guess you might say, is sort of like it's a good counterpoint. So they're going down the Danube and really enjoying themselves. There's this very large stretch of sort of marshish land. So nobody really lives in this very long stretch of the river, and the river, in fact, kind of spreads out and has all these little shallows and backwaters and everything else, right? And no one really lives back there because the ground is not very habitable, just because of the nature of the territory. And of course, the river is in flood. Before they enter there, of course, they're warned that it could be very dangerous, that they could get trapped there or get stuck or get, kind of, just because the water is very turbulent and everything, and it's very mazy, that they should be very careful. They really shouldn't even go there, is essentially what they're told. That they shouldn't try to even camp in there. It's just dangerous. And of course, there's also a sort of impression that it's haunted. That people avoid it. They're not going to be stopped by these warnings, right? Because they've never read ghost stories, but or horror stories, right? It was a new thing. They didn't know. They didn't know when they were walking into a bad situation. There was nobody there to tell them, except for everybody. But so they go in there, and yeah, it's very it's almost like that. It's sort of like you could almost get lost in this area. So think about it like a marsh. Think about like the river being cut up into to various little tributaries and sort of spreading way out before it kind of all brings itself back in again. The area is pervaded with willows, and up to the point where like the willows grow right up to the edge of the shore, so that it doesn't even really seem as though there's ground there. It's like these little islands of just green growth. I think it's just before this when the narrator says that, where before the Danube had been very playful and childlike, it had suddenly become very grown up, right? And become very serious. So now they had to be careful. These two men have to be careful, sort of traversing the Danube. It's a more treacherous river. It's deeper. It's faster. And here, when it gets into this willowed area, this large area, it becomes treacherous, right? So they have to be very careful, and it's somewhat exhausting. They're looking, and I think as they go on to the day, they're trying to find at some point a place to land. These willows are just everywhere, and that they're sort of like rustling all the time, and the wind is up. And it's described when they enter this area that they're sort of like passing into a different territory, like a different country, and they're not welcome, and they are without their passports. It's sort of a feeling of like we entering into some other thing than what they're used to. Like it's not meant for them. They're not supposed to be in here. And there's a sense too of, and then the whole story, I think, of like perception, and one's perception not quite being certain. You're not quite certain what it is you're seeing. At one point, the Swede says, "Hey, look at that," and the narrator looks and he sees something, and he's kind of like at first disgusted and horrified by what he sees, and they both look, but it's kind of like they can't quite make it out clearly. Whether it's the end of the day and the sun glinting off the water or something, but they can't quite tell what they're looking at. And then suddenly it splashes up and goes into the water, and like, oh, it's just an otter. But it's like everything up to that point is like, this is not an otter, right? It's something much more grim. As the day wears on, this first day, they see a peasant in a boat going the opposite direction, and he's sort of like trying to wave them. They're going one direction, and they see him at a distance, and he's waving them. I think maybe they're at shore at this point, and the peasant's like waving his hands and like just gesticulating, trying to obviously trying to provide a warning, and he's shouting, but they can't make him out. And they're like, he's just sort of afraid of the dark, afraid of his own shadow. And they kind of dismiss it as just being whatever. They do finally find a backwater to land their boat, and they're both exhausted from just trying to not only from fighting the currents and making sure not to run aground somewhere where they don't want to and getting stuck, or just in general finding a good place to land and make a camp for the night. And they finally find something, and they're essentially alone out here. Right, there's no one for miles and miles and miles, except for this river and the wind and everything, and the leaves are rustling. And I think they describe there's a lot of description given to the nature part of it. And that's something I really like about Blackwood too, is that it's not as though the nature side of this is an enemy, but it's an alienness. But it's an appreciation for that alienness, which I liked. So they make camp, and then of course I'm going to kind of taper off here, and many unusual things happen throughout that night. And a discovery is made in the next day. And there's definitely a sense there where the sort of misfortune happens of, is there something acting against us? Or is this person, the narrator, thinking, is the Swede sabotaging us? Is this guy that I thought was kind of like a rock, emotionally and mentally, is he stable? There's a slight sense of that. Like maybe this guy is doing it. And then even when the narrator maybe doesn't quite feel that way, at least I find myself still thinking is he really worth your trust? I don't know. So that's the little bit of lead in. And I don't want to get too descriptive of certain things, but I really liked how these two men are constantly fighting with their perceptions, constantly trying to, it's like they see something and it's not really clear what they're looking at. And, it's like they're not sure and you're even less sure because you're only getting part of the description. You're only getting the little bit that the narrator provides you. And I really enjoyed that. There are some statements made, usually by the Swede, but not exclusively. There's some unusual conclusion that's made in these statements that I found a little jarring. I thought, well, that's an unusual thing to say out of nowhere. So a couple more things. One more thing, and then I guess I have to spoil it a little bit. There's obviously a supernatural element. Something is working against these two men. As they go deeper and deeper into the Willows, the longer they're there, the more they feel that they are in an alien country, right? That they are outsiders and they are not welcome, right? The fact that they take up residence here is resented. And as it goes on, it becomes more of like, it's less resentment and more hostility. Although they're affected by it, they're not directly, mentally affected by it, they're not directly gone after. Something I just remembered that I really like, something else that Blackwood does is, and he does this in another story that I really like, and it's so memorable when I just thought of it right now, is that his story has this idea of, like, if you think about this thing, it's dangerous. It's dangerous to think about this. This danger that we're in, you get it out of your mind. Don't think about it, right? The thinking about it and the emotional reaction that you might have to it, and just the process of your brain, which you have, honestly, we really have so little control over if we really think about that, that it will betray you. That this is, that is the method by which you can be attacked or found. And it's like your own thoughts are dangerous, and that they bring this thing to you is, I think, a very prominent part of the story. And there's a lot of deep in the psychological horror side of Blackwood's writing. This territory that these men are in, it's like this place was whatever it was whatever characteristic it has that makes it this way, right? We made the decision, whether it was a conscious decision by the supernatural or not. And I get the sense that not that they that the Willows were here and that was what drew the attention to this place, but rather that this place was this way and it drew the Willows, as though the Willows themselves, this thing in nature, has a sort of otherworldly quality. And that's definitely the feeling of the story. That's why it's called the Willows, I think. Right? They are like the citizens of this unusual country, and they are not entirely perhaps of our world, or that maybe they have the ability to put a foot into something else, into this other reality in a sense, or that they can bridge it or sense it or something. But you have a sense that these Willows are so pervasive in this area because of the quality and the characteristic of this area. And I really think that particular idea is what makes this story go from interesting weird fiction to something more, is this quality of the trees themselves. And I know that I don't know that that's exclusively it, but I think that that's a very interesting choice, right? For me, the best weird fiction and horror fiction is the kind that can take something benign and make it scary or creepy or terrifying, right? It's not the horrible, horrible thing that we know is horrible, right? It's not the serial killer or whatever, right? Obviously, those things are going to be scary. For me, that flip, that taking something as seemingly non-threatening as a willow and making it sort of like it's watching you. It doesn't like that you're here. This is where we live. You might see us out in the wild elsewhere. That's fine. But this is our place. And it just sort of changes, and it makes it just does something really great. That's something really great, So this is the slightly more spoily stuff. We'll see if I can talk about this without ruining anything. The way the story ends, again, revisits this idea of perception. The characters again question things that they had said earlier and whether they were true. that they are traitors to themselves in a sense, that their minds are betraying them, and that's a definite struggle. And there's a sense that something must be sacrificed. The story ends when a sacrifice is made, but it's not these two men who make the sacrifice. So they make the discovery of what the sacrifice was, and there is a sense of like that last minute, like a little bit of like, a little bit of a horror. Like that's maybe the only point where it's truly, where it gets to like what I would think of as more traditional horror. There's this last little moment where you're like, oh. Although honestly, it's like super plain in its language. I just love it. It's such a good story. It's definitely a story you can read multiple times. It is longer. It does take its time to get there. The pioneering essential of horror, and I could see that this is like a foundational work in that sense. This sort of like not just a spooky story, but actually trying to do something beyond just it's a ghost, whoo, trying to do something more. That sense of it being more science fiction-ish, the sense of it having a sort of a science fiction-y or more speculative fiction element to it that sort of branches away from supernatural fiction. I think it's to its credit, but it does because it feels like it's spoken of a little jarringly. I think maybe, as I tried to say, sort of back away from the sort of mood that it's creating, because it just, to me, it felt like such an out of place statement in the story. Otherwise, really enjoy the Willows. The Willows is definitely a story I really liked. I've read a decent amount of Blackwood. I know the Wendigo is the other big one by him, and I honestly don't remember the Wendigo. It's been so long. So he did some pretty cool stuff. I think Blackwood's a really interesting writer. Just one of those writers who is sort of like in between a genre, or sort of like took a little of this genre, took a little of that genre, and sort of mixed it together. And of course, this is a time before these genres that we think of were really firmly set in a sense. I think Lovecraft was the beginning of my journey into weird fiction long ago. And probably the next writer I sought out was Blackwood, hearing that his story, The Willows, was considered to be one of the best. You know what it does kind of remind me of is Who Goes There? And then the Frozen Hell, right? So I did that video on Who Goes There. But in Who Goes There, the story is very tight, right? It's much shorter. And the original version, Frozen Hell, there's a lot more of like adventure, sort of discovery and exploration element at the beginning of the story. That's essentially what was cut out, right? Is the beginning of the story, maybe the first, 20% or something. And this is kind of like that. It feels like an adventure story in part. It takes a while for that to develop, and it's great that Blackwood had the space, because if it just sort of started in the Danube, it just sort of, you didn't have all this like build up, I really don't think that the mood would be set right. And Blackwood is absolutely a mood writer. He gets you into a mood he kind of sort of, his prose is very relaxing and sort of draws you in, and then starts making you think about things in an unusual way. Okay, yeah, I like that. I think that's pretty accurate. I think it's pretty accurate. A writer I really like. We need more remembering of Blackwood, right? I think so. St. Joshi said that Blackwood's story collection, Incredible Adventures from 1914, is one of the preeminent weird fiction collections in maybe this or any century. Now, I don't know that I've read specifically from that collection, so I'll have to check that out. I just discovered that in doing this research. Go check out Algernon Blackwood's The Willows. I will tell you, if you don't own a copy, first of all, it's available on Project Gutenberg, so you can do like an e-version or read it online. That's fine. Although it is a little longer. In these books, it's like 45 or 50 pages roughly. So it's not short. It's not a short story at all. It's a novella, really. And I also believe that Horror Babble, which is a fantastic channel that just does lots of public domain weird fiction, and also like new stuff and everything else. They do like audiobook level quality readings of these stories. Blackwood's The Willows is, I'm sure, in there. I would link it, and you should check out Horror Babble. Their stuff is fantastic. Absolutely, you should subscribe to those guys. That stuff is so good. There's so much there. I don't think that you could really listen to it all. There's so much there. If you like weird fiction, it's a really great place to explore and try it out. All great quality. And of course, they even have audiobook collections that you can get on Audible of their readings if you enjoy his readings. I always think that he has a very good reading voice, very clear. He has an excellent sort of tone that he can take for the fiction, and in a sense preserving what are stories that would probably be forgotten otherwise. The work they do at Horror Babble is just amazing and totally worth your time. Please go check them out. Lots of Lovecraft there too, by the way. If you're interested in reading Lovecraft, I don't know that every Lovecraft story is there, but when Chris was talking about that Lovecraft story that he co-wrote, the name of which is out of my head, but that's where I went. I went to Horror Babble, and it was there, and that's how I read it, and it was a great experience. That's it. Thank you very much. Yes, I am still going to do a 500 subscriber video. Yeah, that's going to happen. I don't know. I don't really know. I don't know what's going to be. I don't know. At this point, it's so far gone. Who knows? Thank you very much for watching. If you like this, you can like it with the little button. And if you want to subscribe, that's cool. I appreciate it. I do this. This is the stuff I do. This is very much, it's like this, usually, sometimes. I will say that every time, I always like the end of my videos more than the beginning. I wish I could flip them, because I always feel like I'm more relaxed at the end of the video after I've been going for a while. I just need to talk for like 20 minutes and then start recording. Like have somebody like on the sidelines just be like, just start now. Do it now. He doesn't even know. That's it. And I do my signature. Bye.